Welcome back to Fast Market. I'm your host, Tom White, along with my co-host for the day, Joe Mazzola. But now let's get to our next guest, and that's going to be Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.com. Thanks for joining us, Megan. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday, guys. Thanks for having me.
So you guys are always pounding the table. You got great sentiment and great data on Tesla in the EV space. But Ford's hitting 20-year highs as far as the stock price. They're getting a lot of traction. I know that you guys sent over a lot of charts for us to take a look at as far as Ford goes. But is this a real deal? Because, typically we don't see Ford trading the way it is. So I'm guessing that the sentiment's pretty positive here.
Yeah, so this one is really interesting. We've been tracking this EV space. Obviously, we have a long history with Tesla, but all of the new entrants in this space over the last year as well, because we've seen this insane, just increase in demand for these electric vehicles. And we're starting to get to a tipping point where consumers are legitimately considering these electric vehicles for their next purchase, which is a huge deal. And so we wouldn't typically consider Ford in the mix whenever we're talking about these different electric vehicles. But whenever you look at the year-over-year demand growth for, let's say, a lot of these names like Tesla, like Rivian, like Lucid, but then also you include Ford in the mix and Toyota and GM and Honda, you can see that this is kind of a shift that's happened really in the last quarter, is that Ford has actually jumped into the middle of that, that year-over-year growth that we typically see alongside these EV names that are getting a lot of hype. We actually just saw Ford jump Tesla. A month ago, Ford was below Tesla. So we definitely start to see Ford gaining some ground, at least in the minds of consumers. And a lot of this is driven whenever you look at a brand by brand breakdown by Ford's electric vehicle lineup. So we're seeing a really a strong surge in demand for that F-150 Lightning, even the hybrid models, the Mustang Mach-E, all of these different brands, these electrified options that consumers have are really driving up that growth for Ford. So when you look at this list, I was going through and I realized that, you have to go all the way down to, I think, the 8th name on that list, the Bronco, to get to a brand that doesn't have some type of an electrified option. And even the Bronco, that is a new release or a relatively refreshed release for Ford. And we're seeing significant traction and significant demand with consumers for that brand as well. So we think that our data for Ford is setting up really strong.
Joe, you got a question here? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure I do. Yeah, so Ford is expecting 40 to 50% of its global vehicle volume to be fully electric by 2030. I guess my question would be, number one, where's the infrastructure, right? And then number two, what are they doing on their end to kind of build those plants? I think they're probably doing something out in your neck of the woods, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I think that they announced they're building a couple of plants. I know one is in Glendale, I believe, Kentucky, which is just down the road. I drive past a Ford plant on my way to work every day. So drove by this morning, but that one I don't believe is building anything electric. However, I think the one in Glendale will. But I think that they're expanding their ability to produce these vehicles. I think that they expect to, increase the Mustang Mach-E production to 200,000 units by 2023. So a lot of these moves that they're making are to meet this demand. And so whenever you look at this chart, that arrow pointing to that quarter is what Ford just capped off. That quarter ended December 31st, and they won't report on this for some time. But demand in that quarter, we recorded up about 53% year over year. And you can see that shaded bar on the right, that is demand in the current quarter. So you see that pace is continuing to accelerate. So this is one of those things that reminds me a lot of Tesla a couple of years ago when we said, okay, this is really forward looking. Demand is there. Demand is obviously there from a consumer perspective. And so now looking forward, it's how well can Ford execute and can it meet this demand in a timely manner and keep consumers happy.
Yeah, Megan, and this seems like, because they're ramping up the F-150 Lightning, right? The best-selling car for the last, 30 years in the U.S. here. They're ramping up production because the orders are starting to grow so much. Is this one of those things where, because I know you guys have the positive data on Tesla on a month-to-month basis. Every time we talk about it, it's really positive. But at the same time, is this first to market? Because that seems to be the hype thing. With less than 10% of all cars sold that are electric, the total addressable market's huge for this. So It seems like GM's lagging a little bit. Tesla's ahead of the game. Lucid's lagging, and some of the others, Volkswagen's lagging a little bit. Is that part of what you're seeing as far as sentiment goes, that anytime something's released, you're going to see positive data?
Yeah, we definitely see a lot of hype whenever companies release these new vehicles. We saw a spike whenever GM announced its the new Chevy that it's going to be producing. But I think in general, just an overall theme is that we're noticing is that consumers are showing a lot of interest in these larger vehicles that are electrified versus just like your traditional car. And so that may be a space where Ford has an advantage. As you mentioned, it's F-150, that lineup. It's one of the best-selling trucks. I'm pretty sure it is the best-selling truck in the U.S. And we see a lot of these consumers who want these larger performance vehicles. And now there are actually vehicles can meet that demand that are electric options. So whenever you look at this chart is showcasing these mentions of people who are talking about wanting to buy an electric vehicle or have just purchased an electric vehicle. External research shows that surveys of people who are saying, over half of U.S. consumers say, yeah, they are likely to consider buying an electric vehicle in the next decade. And we're starting to see that shift up. I think a year ago, that figure was something like 39%. So you're seeing this tipping point where consumers are increasingly open to purchasing an electric vehicle, and now they have more options. And Ford is one of those companies that are bringing these larger vehicle options to the table that consumers can choose from and still have that high performance. And I think with Ford, what we're seeing is that a lot of times we see a big spike up and then some tempering, and we're not necessarily seeing that with Ford. If you were to look at Ford's demand on a line chart, it doesn't look like a mountain peak. It just looks like we're still climbing up that mountain. And so I think that that's one positive thing that Ford has going for it, that maybe some of these other companies were not necessarily seeing that sustainability as much.
Now, yeah, and that's the big thing, Megan. I live in a city, right? I don't see the Ford F-150 at all around me. So it still boggles my mind that it's the best-selling vehicle here in the States. But if you look at this, and based on your data, are you guys still pretty positive on Ford, even though it's hitting 20-year highs? It's not proven anything, but they've got a lot of orders. So with your data, are you guys still, bullish on this name?
Yeah, we went ahead and took an earnings signal reading just to see, okay, based on our demand, based on our happiness ratings, what would things look like if earnings were this week? And I don't think earnings are until February. And Ford's score right now would be about a 64. So, if, let's say, we weren't at all-time highs, we'd be like, man, we have this serious edge. But we think that the market has probably caught on that, they also realize that there's a lot of consumer demand for these Ford products. And so this is probably in line, but it's definitely one we're watching. And it helps to sometimes have this data because you can watch and feel confident that anytime, maybe there is a pullback or something like that. Maybe you see that as an accumulation opportunity because you know that the demand is there and that consumers are likely to purchase these vehicles. It all comes down to long term if Ford can execute. But for us, long term, we know that the demand is there, and we think that this data is really forward looking. So, yeah, definitely a bullish rating from us right now.
Bullish on Ford, and I know Andy and Landon are bullish on Tesla, as always. We don't even need to ask that question. But great stuff, Megan. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Y'all too.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.com. But Joe,